Hey guys, today we're going to see Magnus Carlsen make the 5th strongest player in the world, Jan Nepomniatchi, just completely crumble and self-destruct as if he's a 1600 rated player. That's no exaggeration, and I would totally believe that that's who Magnus is playing, because that's what this game looks like to me. It's just a complete crap show. Magnus even giving Jan some chances to escape, almost looks as if he's toying with him, but when the fatal blows begin to fall and pieces start getting sacrificed, you know the end is near. Jan goes down in flames, and for good reason, which will give us a valuable lesson about the opening that we're going to talk about. But enough foreplay, let's get into this crazy game, which is from the Crunchlabs Champions Chess Tour Quarterfinals. Magnus with the white pieces here. Jan is playing black. It's a Sicilian defense, and specifically, we have the Najdorf variation signaled by this move A6. And this is an opening that is very dear to my heart. It's what I like to play because it leads to a sharp, imbalanced game, and it's how you play for a win if you have the black pieces. So respect to Jan for just going for the throat against Magnus, who responds with bishop to e2. This is still mainstream theory, although it's the third most popular move in this position, right behind bishop to e3 or bishop to g5. But now we get g6 from Jan, which in normal lines is called the dragon variation of the Sicilian defense. I'm not sure if that's what it's called here because of the fact that it's been played in conjunction with this move a6, which is not known to be highly compatible with the move g6. The reason is that here, black does not really need to move his e-pawn in order to develop his dark squared bishop, since it's going to g7. Therefore, his d-pawn will not be a weakness. And he won't have to worry about it being targeted with a move like knight to b5, so that's one reason. In the main lines of the dragon variation, black will often want to get in the move b5 without the supporting move a6, sometimes even sacrificing that b-pawn in order to get his attack going on the queen side as quickly as possible, because that's where white will usually castle. So there's a lot of theory behind why a6 and g6 are not often played together, which would not be obvious to someone who had not studied these openings thoroughly, like, for example, a 1600 rated player, but we expect better from the number 5 player in the world, which is where Jan is at right now. But okay, maybe he doesn't mind playing a substandard move in order to get Magnus out of his comfort zone. But Magnus comes right back at him with g4, which is not the best move. He should just play normally with bishop to e3. This is pretty early to be pushing g4, but it's almost as if Magnus has a sixth sense about when to play these oddball moves that his opponents are just not going to know how to deal with. And sure enough, Jan responds with bishop to g7, not realizing that he can and should prevent his knight from being kicked around with the move g5. And this is a valuable opening lesson for all of us. You really need to know why moves are played when they are played. Why are they played sooner or later? So when you see an oddball move like this early g4, you'll know exactly what to do. Jan is stuck in mainline dragon Sicilian land where you don't normally play h6, even though that's exactly what he should have played right here. In the main line though, white usually doesn't push g4 until much later, after he's put his bishop on e3 and his queen on d2 and black has castled. At which point h6 becomes impossible for black since it would just lose a pawn to bishop takes h6. Additionally, in the main line you aren't so worried about g5 because the knight can hop to h5 without worrying about being taken out by the light squared bishop. Why? Because that bishop is usually gone, having been traded off for this knight over here, which by that time has typically made its way to c4. And we have bishop takes c4. So always a lot of opening nuance in the Sicilian, which you would expect elite players to know. But Magnus knows what to do. g5, jumping at the opportunity to kick that knight. And the best move here is knight to d7. Why Jan played knight to h5 instead, allowing bishop takes h5, destroying his kingside pawn structure, I don't exactly know. And why Magnus played bishop e3 instead of taking that knight out is not obvious either. Okay, I understand he's defending the knight on d4. If you were to just try to win a pawn, of course, with this, you're losing that knight. So he decides to give that knight a little extra protection with bishop to e3. But now Jan increases the pressure on d4. Okay. Again, you don't want to try to win a pawn if you play knight takes c6, b takes c6, and then grabbed on h5. Okay, that's winning the pawn without losing a piece immediately, but then here comes queen to a5, threatening to take on c3. The knight is pinned. If you play something like bishop d2, then there's queen b4, attacking the pawn there on b2. If that's defended, you can take, and then the pawn on e4 falls. So that's not working for white. But you can take on h5, which is what Carlsen should have played here, damaging black's pawn structure while you have the chance, and then you can follow up with knight to d5, which threatens knight takes c6, followed by bishop to b6, and then once the queen moves, there's the fork with knight to c7. This is a common tactical idea in the Sicilian, which you'll see a lot of weak players fall for. Not that an elite player like Jan would allow it, but this is the strongest way for white to play here. But I think Magnus didn't want to take on h5 until he was in a position to immediately win that pawn with the queen. Because here black can complicate things with the move bishop to g4. If f3, you have this crazy line with bishop takes d4, bishop takes, and then bishop takes on f3. Hitting the queen, you have to address that. If you take the bishop, then the knight takes on d4. Looks reasonable for black until you realize that white has queen to c3. Attacking the knight, pinning it to the rook, also threatening knight c7 check. So white is winning here. Did Magnus see this line and just miss this move? Who knows? But what he played, instead of the best move, bishop takes h5, or knight d5 could be played first, that's good too, he moved his knight back to b3, which is not good because it allows a move that Jan did not play, bishop takes c3 with check. And then after b takes c3, the knight gets to escape to g7. There's not going to be any bishop takes h5 anymore. And here as black, you don't really have to worry about the kingside assault from white, beginning with the move h4, because you have options. You can play bishop to e6, you can work on castling queenside, or maybe you'll strike in the center. White's queenside pawn structure is compromised. Black is doing just fine here. But Jan did not take his chance to vacate his knight from the h5 square. He played bishop to e6. And again, bishop takes h5 is a good move, but Carlsen again plays something else, f4. Again gives Jan the opportunity to take on c3 with check and then get his knight out of there, which again he doesn't do. Plays rook to c8. But now he's getting into some trouble with this move f5. That pawn cannot be captured, or the knight on h5 is simply won. The bishop is attacked, so Jan decides to take on b3. Makes some sense. It's coming with tempo. Carlsen has to recapture. At which point, again, he should take on c3. But again, opts not to, placing his bishop on e5, hoping to get in knight g7 on the next move. But Magnus recognizes that this is his last chance to capture on h5, does so finally, and after g takes h5, has the good sense not to grab the pawn on h5, because this would run into knight to b4, hitting c2, threatening the fork. And how do you defend? If you play king d2, just going to pile up with queen to c7, with those three pieces bearing down on the knight on c3. If you drop the queen back like this, there's going to be bishop takes, pawn takes, and then rook takes c3, and knight takes c2 is again threatened. So what Carlsen plays in the game is knight to d5. Very nice move, the strongest move. You're preventing any knight to b4. And suddenly, black doesn't really have anything to do. He's getting close to zugzwang. It's not a pure zugzwang because he does have these sort of waiting moves he can make, which includes what the computer suggests, which is grabbing the pawn on b2. This is not what was played in the game, but I'm just going to show you this engine line where black just kind of flails around while white slowly improves his position. This knight on d5 is an absolute beast, and black can't really do anything about it. White's just going to rip open the king side when he feels the moment is right with the move g6. So it's too dangerous for black to try to castle over there. You can't play king to d7 or queen to d7 because that runs into the fork with the knight. So here's just a sample line of some things that black can try. You can see how white will eventually break through, taking out that pawn in the h file. There's multiple ways for white to win, but in this specific line that the engine gives, white just ends up doubling the heavy artillery on the d file, breaking through with c5. Black tries knight to b4, but we take the pawn here. And then we get in our bishop to b6. The queen gets forced to d7, which means after knight f6 check, That knight must be taken out because it's forking the king and queen, so bishop takes f6 is forced. And then white is just piling up on this d pawn here, which black can't really save. Just an example of one way it could go down, which would have allowed Jan to last longer, even though this is all hopeless. He understandably decides to get provocative. He plays e6. He says, I'm not going to just let that knight hang out there. I got to do something active. But now Carlsen lands a series of devastating blows, beginning with f takes e6, f takes e6, and there goes the h-pawn with check. Now he can't move the king to f8 because the rook comes in with check, and checkmate's going to be around the corner. So king to d7 was his plan, and then after queen f7 check, he thought it might be okay to block with the knight. As we said before, d7 is a square that's vulnerable to a knight fork, which Magnus now executes with the move knight to b6 check. King goes to c7, then he takes out the rook on c8. Now you can't take with the queen or you're going to lose your knight here on e7. So the king takes on c8, which means the e6 pawn falls with check. King goes to b8. Magnus castles. He's just simply going to infiltrate with rook to f7. We got knight to c6. Here comes the rook. Knight to d4. Hits the queen, hits the pawn on c2. What are you going to do about that? Well, Carlsen's going to play queen to d5 and threaten checkmate in 1 on b7. Also threatens to win the knight here. So knight to c6 is forced. But now come the final brutal tactical blows, beginning with rook takes a6. And Jan is fully aware that he cannot take that rook. If he were to do so, then bishop to a7 check would force checkmate in another 2 moves after king to c8. Queen takes c6 check. You can only put your queen in the way, after which queen takes c7 is mate. So what was played instead was bishop to d4, setting the stage for the final tactical shot. This stuff comes as naturally as breathing to Carlsen. I'm sure finding rook takes b7 check was not very difficult, at which point Jan threw in the towel. He knew it was over, for if he were to capture that rook, there would follow queen takes c6 check, king to b8, and rook to a8 checkmate. So thanks for coming along on this destructive journey where we got to witness the world's number 5 player get absolutely torn apart in a way that you would expect a 1600 rated player to lose. Being unfamiliar with opening nuances, which would be understandable even for a player rated over 2000, but for a world-class player, we expect more. Better go study your openings, Jan, especially those oddball moves, which are unpopular for good reason, but if you don't know the reason and you don't know how to respond, they can be very dangerous. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, but only if you found value here, and I will see you next time.